Welcome to History Captain, where we explore the lives of the most influential and powerful figures in history. Please remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. In this episode, we'll be talking about Jaja of Opobo, the slave boy who became king. Born in Umuduroha, Amaibo, Imo State in the year 1821, his actual birth name is unknown and also the identity of his true parents. The Igbo land in the 1800s was in chaos as it saw Europeans invade the land for slaves in exchange for firearms, tobacco, bullets, and black slave traders were invading different regions and selling Igbos to slavery. After I was kidnapped and taken to Bonny Island, Rivers State, where it was renamed Jubo Juboga by his first master and later resold to Chief Alali, the head of the Opobo Manlina group of houses. It was there that the British, who couldn't pronounce his name properly, gave him the name Jaja. From the 15th to the 18th century, Opobo, like the other city-states, gained its wealth from the profits of slave trade. This thriving business was enough to make one rich as well as give him popularity. However, the abolition of the slave trade in 1807 was supplanted by the trade in palm oil. Palm oil in itself was so vibrant that the region was named the Oil Rivers area. Astute in business and politics, Jaja became the head of the Anna Pepple House, extending its activities and influence by absorbing other houses, increasing operations in hinterland, and augmenting the number of European contacts. Later on, a power struggle will ensue among rival factions in the houses of Bonny, led by Pepple's House High Chief Okojumbo, leading to the breakaway of the faction led by Jaja. He established a new settlement which he named Opobo in 1869, where he became King Jaja of Opobo. This new status saw him declare himself independent of Bonny. Opobo soon dominated the region's lucrative palm oil trade and became home to 14 of what were formerly Bonny's 18 trade houses. Part of this success is attributed to the fact that Jaja made moves to block the access of British merchants to the interior, giving him an effective monopoly. At times, Opobo even shipped palm oil directly to Liverpool, independent of British middlemen. Apart from the fact that he was a wealthy merchant and a diplomatic man, he was also a man of honor and power. This is exemplified when he aided the Queen of England in the battle in the Gold Coast, the Ashanti War, and was awarded the Sword of Honor from Queen Victoria in 1871. As time went on, the oil trade business in Opobo land began to expand, and the ambitions of the Europeans to dominate this market grew, thus creating a conflict between Jaja and British top sales and business tycoons, one of which was John Holt of Liverpool. While Jaja evaded attempts by Holt to penetrate Jaja's market in the Kwa Ibo River, Liverpool members of the African Association were pressing for strong action against Jaja over what they described as a falling rate of profits. In the course of national interest, King Jaja dealt several blows on the Kwa Ibo people in 1881. He raided about 7 of their villages, captured many, and executed about 100 people for engaging in direct trade with the Europeans. Even when the British came up with funny tricks and laws to outrun Jaja in the quest of the control of the oil region, like a game of chess, he always checkmated them, and this angered the British more. At the 1884 Berlin Conference, however, all the European powers designated Opobo as a British territory, and the British soon moved to claim it. While Jaja refused to cease taxing British traders, Henry Hamilton Johnston, a British vice consul, invited Jaja for negotiations in 1887. By September of 1887, Johnston brought a warship named the HMS Goshawk to Opobo and invited Jaja on board. He assured Jaja that nothing would happen to him, but when he went on board, he was given 2 bad choices by Johnson. One was that if he would not allow the Europeans access, he could go back and face immediate bombardment from the British Navy, and the other is that he goes into exile. Jaja, being a man of strong values and principles, chose not to back down. The British arrested him and tried him in Accra in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, then took him to London for some time, where he met Queen Victoria and was a guest in Buckingham Palace. No one knew what transpired between him and the Queen, but after some time, he was finally deported to the West Indies. While in exile in the Caribbean, his presence was alleged to be because of immense civil unrest among the people of Barbados. After years of campaigning for his freedom, Jaja was moved to the island of São Vicente, Cape Verde, off the coast of West Africa to prevent the possibility of a revolt. Jaja eventually won his liberty after years of fighting against his wrongful abduction, and it was agreed by the parliament that he could be repatriated to his kingdom state of Opobo. Jaja, now well advanced in age, longed to see his beloved Opobo land again. Now this is the twist. The people of the Barbados, mostly people of African and Nigerian descent, heard rumors about an African king that was being captured and is now on his way to the island. They all rallied themselves together to give him a befitting reception. It was quite an interesting episode of his life in Barbados. The British brought him and wanted to try him on the island for his crimes. The people of the island felt insulted about how an African king had been subjected to such ridicule and shame. Just when the ship made berth at the waterside, the people of the island rushed and camped at the waterside to avoid the British bringing Jaja to the colonial courthouse, which was in the middle of the village square. They literally camped at the waterside throughout the night. The next day, which was a Sunday, the people of the island held their church service on the waterside, right by the ship. Jaja was seen looking through as the service goes on, and before the service was over, he came out and there was a loud cry amongst the women, welcoming him, a king from their ancestral motherland. The crowd went hysterically, and the British feared that they may plan an escape plan for him, covered their bags, and sailed back to St. Vincent. He was moved around from one place to the other around the West Indies so that his family lineage can be traced in St. Vincent. It was even said at the time that he got married and had children. Jaja in the West Indies, Barbados and St. Vincent is a common slang for someone who is arrogant and carries himself or herself with an air of pride and dignity, coined after the way King Jaja held his head up high while he was at the island. In 1891, Jaja was granted permission to return to Opobo but died en route, allegedly poisoned with a cup of tea in June. His body was shipped instead to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, where he was buried. Following his exile and death, the power of the Opobo state rapidly declined. The land was plagued with slave trades, riots, and the British exploited the land for its natural resources. After many years of clamor and protest, his body was properly exhumed and sent back to his beloved Opobo kingdom, where he was laid to rest. His remains are now a sacred grave shrine behind the palace of the Amaya Nabo of Opobo. At History Captain, and how she stopped the killing of twins in Nigeria. Killing newborn twins was a common practice in the 19th century among the Ibibio people of Nigeria, but one Scotswoman went to great lengths to put an end to this. Aberdeen-born Mary Slessor was one of the few missionaries in Africa who had learned the local language, adapted to native customs and environment, and gained the trust of the locals in order to make a truly positive impact. Her father, a shoemaker from Buchan, became incapacitated by alcoholism, and Mary more or less became the breadwinner for the family. From the age of 11, she worked as a half-timer mill girl in the Baxter Brothers & Co. Limited, spending half of the day at a school provided by the mill owners and the other half working for the company. At the age of 14, she had become a skilled jute worker, but Mary had bigger plans for her future. Inspired by her mother's issues of the missionary record, Mary began to teach voluntarily at the New Dundee Mission. When David Livingstone died in 1873, resulting in a nationwide call for more missionaries, Mary decided to follow in his footsteps. She set sail in the SS Ethiopia on 5th of August 1876, arriving in West Africa just over a month later, aged 28. Mary was first assigned to Calabar in southern Nigeria, where her duties included teaching children and working in the dispensary. Along with learning the local language Efik, she adapted to eating the local food to save money so she could send a large chunk of her wages back home to support her sister and mother. While her broad Dundonian accent was hard to disguise, Mary tried to blend in by cutting her bright red hair short and discarding her Victorian clothes. She became known for her interest in women and children's rights and well-being, which were being often at risk in Calabar. When twins were born, it was thought that one of them was the child of the devil, and since it was not known which one, both would be left for dead in the bush and the mother banished from the community, often a death sentence itself. Mary soon took it upon herself to rescue and protect these vulnerable women and children, and made it a priority to change cultural beliefs about twins. Although it was discouraged by the Mission Society to adopt any of the abandoned children, Mary was one of the few who ignored the rules. She sent out twins missionaries to find and care for abandoned twins at the mission house and adopted every child she found. Once she took in a baby girl as her own daughter, calling her Jenny, and eventually taking her back to Scotland. Over a lifetime, Mary saved hundreds of twins from the bush. She also helped heal the sick and put an end to the practice of making suspects drink poison to determine whether they were guilty. As a missionary, she traveled to other tribes spreading the word of Jesus Christ. In 1888, she traveled north to Okoyong and lived a simple life there for 15 years among the Okoyong and Efik people, and became known as the White Queen of Okoyong. She continued her focus on settling disputes, encouraging trade, establishing social change, and introducing Western education and evangelism. In 1892, she became vice consul in Okoyong, presiding over the native court, and in 1905 she was named vice president of Ikot Obong Native Court before being awarded the Order of the St. John of Jerusalem in 1913. Because she has always placed the needs of others before her own, Mary was often challenged by ill health and battled bouts of malaria and other tropical diseases. This sometimes got so severe that she had to go back home to Dundee to recover, but always made sure to return to her mission. She passed away in 1915 at the age of 66 in Calabar. Mary was given a state funeral and buried in Duketown in Nigeria with a huge granite cross from Scotland across her grave. More than 100 years since her death, Mary's legacy lives on both in Africa and closer to home. Several memorials testify to the value placed on her work, with a road, a roundabout, a church, and various statues commemorating her in Calabar. In Scotland, A bust of Mary was erected in the Hall of Heroes on the National Wallace Monument in Stirling, and in 2015, a memorial was unveiled in Dundee, marking the 100th anniversary of her death. Mary also appeared in 1997 on Clydesdale's Bank £10 notes, earning her a place in history as the first female to be commemorated on a Scottish banknote, a fitting honour for such a remarkable individual. In this episode, we'll be talking about a man who, despite all troubles, stood his ground and later became the first African-American naval pilot in the history of America. Follow along as we will take you on an exciting journey into the life of this extraordinary pilot and fighter. Ensign Jesse L. Brown was a man who was familiar with trouble as he was with his name. He was also a man who knew from a young age how to keep going even when things got hard. He was a target of racial slurs in the South in the early 1900s, but that didn't stop him from being determined. He took that determination with him through elementary school, high school, college, and finally his aviation training. He became a beloved wingman, pilot, husband, and father. Jesse Brown was born into a busy house of 8 to parents John and Lindsay Brown. Brown's parents put a lot of importance on school from the time he was young. He and his 5 siblings walked over 3 miles every day to their one-room schoolhouse. Brown eventually moved in with one of his aunts so he could go to a better high school. Even though the school was segregated, Brown got 2nd place in his class and was named salutatorian. He then decided he wanted to go further by applying to a university to learn more. Brown's older brother went to an all-black college, and many people told Brown he should do the same. But Brown had bigger plans. Brown got into the Ohio State University because one of his heroes, Jesse Owens, had gone there. Brown kept working while he was at the Ohio State University and overcame many problems while he was there. Brown used to do track and field and also wrestling at the university, but he had to stop doing both because he had to work more than one job to pay for the tuition. Even when Brown worked from 3:30 p.m. to midnight every day at a local railroad company and as a cleaner, his grades stayed in top tier. Brown was getting his degree in architectural engineering, but he hoped to get into the program for pilots. Even though he had good grades, the university turned him down more than once because of the color of his skin. Brown found out about an aviation program at Ohio State through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps (NROTC) program. On July 8, 1946, Brown joined the Naval Reserves. From there, Brown went on to get a commission in the U.S. Navy, and he was one of only 14 black people out of 5,600 who had finished the program. Brown went into flight school where he expected to meet the same resistance he had met his whole life. He was happy to find out, though, that the other cadets in his aviation training were friendly. Brown married Daisy Nix in secret while he was in flight school in Pensacola, Florida, because men in flight school were not allowed to get married or they would be kicked out of the program. And in 1949, they had one daughter. Ensign Brown was sent to Fighter Squadron 32 on the USS Leyte 18 months after he finished his pilot training. There he did a lot of training exercises, and by the time the Korean War started, Brown had earned a lot of respect from his superiors and his wingmen. That meant the other pilots saw him as a good leader and a skilled pilot. When the Korean War started, the leaders of the campaign thought they needed more skilled pilots. That was when they called on Ensign Brown's ships, the Leyte. The Leyte sailed halfway around the world, and on October 8, 1950, it arrived in Korea. A lot of close air support missions were flown by Ensign Brown, and there was one time when 100,000 Chinese troops surrounded 15,000 American troops. Ensign Brown and the other pilots in the Leyte had to do a lot of close air support missions to stop the Chinese from getting ahead of the Americans. In one mission, Ensign Brown and the other pilots were once again asked to provide close air support. While the pilots were looking for the enemy, another pilot told them that Ensign Brown was running low on fuel. Most likely, this was caused by small arms fire from an enemy hiding in the snow. Ensign Brown tried to right his plane by dropping the external fuel tanks and rockets, but it didn't work. His plane crashed into the bowl-shaped valley near the top of a mountain, exploded on impact, and pinned Ensign Brown by his leg on the part of the plane. The other pilots were flying around above Ensign Brown to see what they could do to help him, but then they heard that an helicopter would try to save him. When his wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Ordner, saw that Ensign Brown was stuck, he crashed his plane on purpose on the mountain and ran to help his fallen wingman. At this point, a fire had started and was getting close to Ensign Brown's fuel tanks, putting both of them in danger. Ensign Brown started to fall in and out of sleep, and when Ordner realized he couldn't save Ensign Brown, he tried to put out the plane's fire with the snow that was around it. The rescue helicopter came, but after 45 minutes of trying to free Ensign Brown with an axe, they still couldn't. "Tell Daisy I love her," was the last thing he said. His bosses wouldn't let him go back to Ensign Brown's body because they were afraid of an ambush. They didn't want the plane or the body to fall into Chinese hands, so they bombed the crash site with napalm while the pilots said the Lord's Prayer over the radio. Ensign Brown was the first black man to die during the Korean War. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the Purple Hearts, the Naval Aviator Badge, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Korean Service Medal, the Korean Presidential Unit Citation, the United Nations Korea Medal, the Korean War Service Medal, and the Air Medal were all given to him. The Navy put the Knox-class frigate USS Jesse L. Brown into service, among other things. Brown's death made a lot of other African Americans want to become pilots. This helped break down many racial barriers, showing that Brown's determination in his whole life have given many people hope and it will never be forgotten. At History Captain, we strive to provide our viewers with exciting and informative content about the world's greatest historical figures. We hope that you have found this video about Jesse L. Brown, the first African American naval pilot, both exciting and enlightening. We will talk about the causes and effects of the fall of the Oyo Empire in this episode. Let's start with some background on the empire and its location. The Oyo Empire was a pre-colonial West African empire that lasted from the 14th to the 19th centuries. It was one of the most powerful and important empires in West Africa at the time. It was in what is now known as southwestern Nigeria. The Yoruba people started the Oyo Empire, and it grew quickly through trade and taking over other lands. The Alaafin, or king, who was thought to be divine, was in charge of the empire's highly centralized government. The Alaafin was helped by a council of chiefs, and governors ran the different parts of the empire. The Oyo Empire was also known for how well it did in war, and it kept a standing army with both foot soldiers and mounted soldiers. The empire did a lot of business with European merchants and became a major exporter of slaves, ivory, and other goods. But in the 18th century, the Oyo Empire began to fall apart because of fighting among its own people and pressure from European powers. At the beginning of the 19th century, the empire fell apart, and several smaller Yoruba kingdoms took its place. What caused the fall of the Oyo Empire? Soon after, the Oyo Empire moved west, taking over Port Novo and making Dahomey, which is now the Benin Republic, a vassal state. Dahomey had to pay regular tributes to Oyo of 40 guns and 400 loads of cowries and corals. After wars that made the Dahomeyans afraid of the Oyo army, Alaafin Labisi chose a new Basharu, which is also known as Prime Minister. The constitution said that if the Alaafin became too dictatorial, the Prime Minister could pass a vote of non-confidence. This would turn the Oyomesi, that is the legislators, against the Alaafin, and an empty calabash would be given to the emperor as a sign that he had to kill himself and make way for a new Alaafin, since the Oyomesi had lost faith in his rule. The Basharu was a high priest who ran all the cults except for Shango and Nifa. This would make him say that the ancestors and heavens no longer trusted an Alaafin. Before Ga was chosen, the empire unwritten rules had been changed from the old ways that the Aremo, the heir apparent, ran things after an Alaafin died. The constitution said that the Alaafin's heir had to die at the same time as the Alaafin. This was done to avoid fights over the succession and make the monarchical system like a republic. This gave more power to Basharu Ga. Ga became very cruel and drunk. If anyone said that an Alaafin or his prince didn't respect the Oyomesi, or that an Alaafin was acting like he was better than everyone else, Basharu Ga put 5 Alaafins on the throne and then killed 4 of them. He and his family ruled harshly for 20 years, almost like they were Alaafins. By the time Alaafin Abiodun became the 5th emperor, people were tired of Ga's rule. On a certain day, Oyabi, the Alaafin, and the people, with the help of Are Ona Kakanfo, the military commander of all the Oyo army, broke the jinx of Ga's powerful magic. They rounded up, captured, and killed all of Ga's family, except for Ojo, Ga's first son. Ga died when his house caught on fire. The rest of Abiodun's rule from 1774 to 1789 was peaceful. It was called a golden reign. But after 20 years of internal imbalance caused by taking advantage of the lawless years, the emperor's center could not longer hold it any longer. Under the leadership of the warrior Lishabi, the people of the Egba province declared their independence and moved to where they are now, in Abeokuta. The Egbas were upset that the governors of their 3 provinces in the empire, called Ilaris, were mistreating them and there was no one to stop them. When Abiodun took power, he sent a punishment expedition against the Egbas. However, the rocky hills of Abeokuta made it impossible for the Oyo cavalry to subdue the Egbas. This caused Oyo's provinces to declare their independence one after the other. Even Dahomey had the nerve to attack Ketu, the last Yoruba district in the west, without worrying about the Oyo Imperial Army. As far as Ewe, which is now in the country of Togo, Oyo started to fade. But Abiodun brought law and order back to the city. He died in 1789, ending his rule, and a new Alaafin was crowned, Alaafin Awole, who ruled between 1789 and 1796. Alaafin Awole didn't make things better. He could have helped Abiodun keep the empire together, but he didn't. Under Awole, Afonja was the military commander, or Are Ona Kakanfo, even though the two of them had wanted to be king. In the Oyo constitution, it was against the rules for the Alaafin and the Are to live in the same city. The emperor lived in the capital, but the Are had to live somewhere else, preferably in a town where enemies were close by. Afonja also came from a royal family, but he was born a slave. This probably hurt his chances of becoming emperor, even though some Oyomesi chiefs liked him. Ilorin was started by Afonja's great-grandfather. When Alaafin Awole first asked Afonja to attack Akpomu as part of a yearly military drill, Oyomesi started to lose faith in him. The Alaafin must tell the Oyo army to get stronger, but Awole forgot to mention that Akpomu was an Ile-Ife town. This goes against the Alaafin's coronation oath, which says that they got all their royal swords from Ife and would never raise a sword against Ife. Second, Awole told Afonja to attack Iwere town, which was a fortified town that the swords and arrows of the Oyo army couldn't get into. It was a well thought out plan by Awole to get rid of Are Afonja, since the Are must kill himself if he ever loses a battle. This was also the secret to the strength of the Oyo army in its heyday, because the Are must fight to die or fight to win. So his army must fight to the end and can't run away. Afonja knew this. So instead of fighting a fight he couldn't win, he said he wouldn't go because the town Iwere was where Alaafin Ajagbo's mother was from. Ajagbo was the Alaafin from 1587 to 1624. He created the titles of Are Ona Kakanfo, Bashorun, Agbakin, and Nashipa. All but Bashorun and Nashipa were military titles. Oyomesi lost faith in Awole for a third reason: he was trying to bring Islam to Yoruba land. Most Yorubas don't trust people who practice Islam, and the constitution says that the Alaafin can't join the religion because men are in charge and emirs are dictators. Note that some of the Oyomesi were women. Powerful women like Efun Shetan and Niwura also had the say in politics, so Oyo was not just a society run by men. Also, the Alaafin couldn't have all the power that the emirs in the north did. Soon, Oyomesi sent Awole the empty calabash, which caused him to kill himself. Awole was not missed during his rule, which made the empire worse and didn't stop the Laris from being main in their districts. The center was no longer held, and even the next Alaafin's reign was short because people lost hope and needed strong leadership. Adebo was in charge for 130 days. Maku took over him and was in charge for only 2 months. From 1797 to 1803, the capital was without a leader. So Afonja's power began to grow. Afonja tried to become an emperor, but some chiefs didn't want that to happen. So in 1817, he made Ilorin an independent province, just like other provinces had done before. Malam Alimi was a Fulani advisor to Afonja, and he urged a jihadist warrior named Danfodio to help Afonja. Fulani and Hausa people were often used as cheap laborers and servants in Yoruba land. They were so popular that people in Nigeria continued to look down their noses at northerners even after the colonial era ended. So when the call to arms came, Many of the Hausa and Fulani people who worked in the underground economy in Oyo ran away to Ilorin. Ojo, who was Ga's living son, marched against Ilorin with the Onikoyi of Ikoyi, which at the time was the largest provincial town in Oyo. The Ikoyi was an imperial army's royal battalion. It was also called the Ikoyi Esho, which means Guards Battalion. When the war started, the Hausa and Fulani ex-workers went around the country stealing and selling their former Yoruba aristocratic masters as slaves to white slave buyers. This made Afoja angry because Ajayi Crowther and his mother were sold to the Portuguese after Muslims burned down their village in 1821. Alimi had Afoja killed because he still thought to be more loyal to Yoruba than to Islam. Afoja's son, Abdulsalami, then took the throne of Ilorin as emir and swore allegiance to the Sokoto Caliphate. So, Ilorin became a part of the Sokoto Caliphate. There was no longer a central government in Oyo, and many of the provinces kept breaking off on their own. The Yorubas did not have a reason to fight together and take back Ilorin because they were not united. At this time, some Yorubas who lived in Ilorin had also converted to Islam. This meant that even though Ilorin was full of warriors ready to fight for one cause, the Yorubas didn't have a single cause that they all stood for. The center could no longer hold, and everything went very wrong. The Oyo army didn't have any more horses because they used to buy them from trade routes in the north, which were now closed because of the war with the Fulani and Hausa people. The war did not destroy the capital city of Oyo. Instead, its people left for safer places like Ilorin, Kaba, which is now part of Nigeria's Kogi state, and the forested south. The Fulani Ilorin army couldn't attack or take the city of Oyo because it was so big and had 17 gates. In Agoja, which is further south, a new Oyo city was found, and Atiba became the new Alafin. By this time, the Alafin was trying hard to keep the dignity that she had lost. Yoruba was no longer an empire. It was more like the Greek city-states of Athens, Sparta, Macedonia, and so on. Yoruba city-states like Owu, Egba, Ijebu, Ondo, and Ijesha started to form. They had facial marks that showed how they were different, and they were no longer made to pay allegiance to a single leader. There were a lot of civil wars. Famine spread like wildfire, and slave hunters were common. Before this time, the Yoruba never heard of slavery because Oyo did not let any Yorubas be sold as slaves. The slaves' coasts were now full of Yoruba slaves because Hausa and Fulani armies and slave hunting warlords fed their armies with the new economic trade system that started when Old Oyo, which was closer to the river Niger, fell. When Ijebu and Ife started selling refugees from Old Oyo as slaves, it started a new war. Even today, Ijebu is known as a businessman's village. These are the Modakeke who retraced their way back to Ife, where the founder of Old Oyo had originally come from. Owu and these refugees therefore attacked Ife in reprisal. This turned Ijebu and Ife against Owu. The Ijebus were the first to employ the use of guns in any battle and thus completely destroyed Owu town. Owu people fled to Egba for refuge. Ijebu even attacked the Egbas for giving shelter to the Owu people. Keep in mind that Egba used to be where Ibadan is now, but there were a few scattered towns and villages. Warriors from the destroyed or sacked provinces of Owu and other tribes who were moving south found a place to live in Elele. This was the start of what is now called Ibadan. Warriors who wanted to bring the old glory came to the new city, Ibadan. Ibadan began to control the palm oil belt, which was just starting to replace the trade in people because it was in a rainforest area. After that, it became the biggest city in West Africa. Ibadan became a military town where warriors from all over Yoruba country came to live there. The question of who was who came up, and the Oyo drove the rude Ife and Egba people away. Then, Egba moved to what is now Abeokuta with the Owu people. Ife, on the other hand, didn't get along with the Oyo people, especially the Modakeke who lived in Ife. Keep in mind that Ibadan also became mostly Oyo. But the Hausa, Fulani, and Yoruba Muslim cavalry in Ilorin started a new phase of the war when they saw New Oyo and Ibadan rising. They were still determined to completely expand the Sokoto Caliphate to the south by destroying the last of the Yoruba influence. Ibadan knew it could no longer control the Oyo army's cavalry, which used to be a strong force. Yoruba kings and chiefs still ride horses in celebration today as a remnant of the horse tradition before these wars. Still, the Sokoto Caliphate in the north stopped sending horses to Ibadan. Even though Ijebu was the first to use guns, Ibadan did a lot of practice with them and got really good at it. Oyo were experienced warriors, so infantry from Ibadan marched out to meet the jihadists who were looting villages and towns from Ilorin to the south without being stopped. In 1839, the fearsome new Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò, Balogun Latosha, led a new decisive battle in Osogbo. The infantry from Ibadan were good shots and they knocked the jihadist riders off their horses in a way that caused many Muslim invaders to die. The number of deaths was so high that they ran back to the north, putting an end to the long-running Fulani-Oyo wars and the jihadist invasion in a very decisive victory. So, Ibadan became the most powerful of all Yoruba states. Even though Ibadan was the military arm of the new Oyo government, the city-states wanted to show their independence from the Alaafin. This led to a 16-year Yoruba civil war in which Ilorin, Egba, Ijebu, Ekiti, Ijesha, and Ife fought against Ibadan and Modakeke. Ibadan didn't lose a battle for 16 years until British and Anglican missionaries called for a peace treaty. After Nigeria got its independence, it wasn't a big surprise that Chief Obafemi Awolowo, an Ijebu statesman, made Ibadan the capital of the western region in Nigeria's Yoruba region. At History Captain, we try to
7 influential African empires, from ancient Sudan to medieval Zimbabwe. In this video, you will get the facts on 7 African kingdoms that made their mark in history. Number 1. The Kingdom of Kush. Though often overshadowed by its Egyptian neighbors to the north, the Kingdom of Kush stood as a regional power in Africa for over 1,000 years. This ancient Nubian empire reached its peak in the 2nd millennium BC when it 100,000 manuscripts. The Mali Empire eventually disintegrated in the 16th century, but at its peak, it was one of the jewels of the African continent and was known over the world for its wealth and luxury. One legendary tale about the kingdom's riches concerns the ruler Mansa Musa, who made a stopover in Egypt during the 14th century pilgrimage to Mecca. According to contemporary sources, Musa dished out so much gold during the visit that it caused its value to plummet in Egyptian markets for several years. 6. The Songhai Empire. For sheer size, few states in African history can compare to the Songhai Empire. Formed in the 15th century from some of the former regions of the Mali Empire, this West African kingdom was larger than Western Europe and comprised parts of a dozen modern-day nations. The empire enjoyed a period of prosperity thanks to vigorous trade policies and a sophisticated bureaucratic system that separated its vast holdings into different provinces, each ruled by its own governor. It reached its zenith in the earlier 16th century under the rule of the devout King Mohammed I Askia, who conquered new lands, forged an alliance with Egypt's Muslim caliph, and established hundreds of Islamic schools in Timbuktu. While the Songhai Empire was once among the most powerful states in the world, it later crumbled in the late 1500s after a period of civil war and internal strife left it open to an invasion by the Sultan of Morocco. Finally, the seventh one, the Great Zimbabwe. One of the most impressive monuments in sub-Saharan Africa is the Great Zimbabwe, an imposing collection of stacked boulders, stone towers, and defensive walls assembled from cut granite blocks. The rock citadel has been the subject of myth and legends. It was once thought to be the residence of the biblical Queen of Sheba, but historians now know it as the capital city of an indigenous empire that thrived in the regions between the 13th and 15th centuries. This kingdom ruled over a large chunk of modern-day Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. It was particularly rich in cattle and precious metals, and stood astride a trade route that connected the region's gold fields with ports on the Indian Ocean coast. Though little is known about its history, the remains of artifacts such as Chinese pottery, Arabian glass, and European textiles indicate that it was once a well-connected mercantile center. The fortress city at the Great Zimbabwe was mysteriously abandoned sometimes in the 15th century after the kingdom went into decline, but in its heyday, it was home to an estimated 20,000 people.